how can understanding our fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses help us find safety in our sex life and rebuild trust after trauma? Join us as we dive into this critical topic with certified Somatica sex and relationship coach Jason Courtemanche, offering practical strategies and deep insight to help you and your partner reconnect with yourself and one another. Welcome back to Connection Over Perfection, where we get into the heart of what truly connects us to ourselves and one another. Today, we're joined by a truly fascinating individual whose journey is a testament to transformation and the power of self-discovery. Meet Jason Courtemanche, a certified Somatica sex and relationship coach whose path from confronting his own insecurities to helping others find deep intimacy and connection is nothing short of inspiring. Beyond his professional achievements, Jason is an identical twin, a tango dancer, and a minister, bringing a rich depth of experience to his coaching. His dedication to lifelong learning shines through his pursuit of a doctorate in spiritual science and numerous certifications in relationship and spiritual coaching. But what really draws you in is Jason's authenticity, which I experienced in our planning call. And he was very gracious to spend a little bit of time to just help me. So I really appreciated that. And his just open-hearted approach to life and love. So grab your favorite cup of tea or coffee, and let's get ready to explore the realms of intimacy, connection, and personal growth with Jason. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit how you ended up as a sex and relationship coach.
Yeah, it's something I definitely wasn't trying to be. Like a lot of people were just making similar mistakes in relationships. And I was just eventually got sick and tired. And so I was looking for a coach or a class, and everything at the time I was finding was about pickup game, and it didn't land for me. It seemed like it was just a performance. And I was like, I like who I am. And so through looking, I finally stumbled upon a video on YouTube of the founders of the Somatic Institute, demoing like a passion exercise with Dr. Doe, a favorite YouTuber of mine. And it's like the moment they shared this really intimate moment of like desire and passion and blushing. And I was like so intrigued. I was like, what is going on right there? I need to learn more. And through exploring what they had to offer, it just seemed like a great fit. And then my first weekend of doing the classes, I was like, oh, I have the patience for this. I really love deep connection one-on-one. And then that's when the light bulb went off. I was like, well, maybe I could do this. And what started out as my own personal growth, it kind of just snowballed from there.
That's awesome. I love that. So tell us, what is a sex and relationship coach?
Great question. So a sex relation coach really helps individuals and couples really work on learning intimacy through practice, because it's like, or flirting, or like there's so many skills that everyone's, at least my experience growing up, like, oh, just flirt. It's like that didn't help me at all. I was so confused, and I wasn't natural at it.
Like,
I
what
was
does that even mean?
exactly. And so one of the benefits of a sex relationship coach is to really kind of help practice learning how to flirt, and like learning how to really share erotic energy and how that lands on another person, and giving feedback. And so, and it's that mixture of getting the felt experience and getting the feedback. So it's like I'm thinking now, like my friend that I did like the flirting exercise, she's like, oh, you can bring even more. And like that encouragement, I was like, oh, I'm really holding back and didn't realize it. And then like to have that encouragement, and then like to hear how like it landed and how yummy it was for her to feel my erotic energy. And then like having that, I would never have been that bold, but to have that reference point of like, oh, that's what it feels like when I'm doing it in a way that feels useful, because I didn't realize I was playing it so cautiously that it's like it wasn't getting across at all that I like people. And so, which looking back makes perfect sense, where it's like people I was interested in the past had no idea I was interested in, because I didn't realize how much of my intent I was holding back and how much of my erotic energy I was holding back, and wasn't flirting at all.
And how much vulnerability ties into that. And so it sounds like For those
Yeah,
that are
definitely.
listening, his facial expression was like, yes. To have that safe space to get that positive feedback and not that fear of rejection. I mean, that fear of rejection is catastrophic.
Oh, it really is. It's paralyzing. And my experience, not if you don't, I didn't really have that many great models of what flirting looked like. And the thing I saw the most was like when strangers are like, I like give it like overflowing, like dumping their erotic energy on strangers on the train
Right.
does not feel authentic. It's like, oh, I definitely don't want to do that. And so I completely understand why I decide like, oh, I'm going to be real cautious, but missing and not realizing like there's a big middle ground that you need to reach
Right.
and kind of find that sweet spot. And learning by doing really helped me have the felt experience of how do you gauge it and how do I really stay embodied enough to know where that line is because it's different for every person, but realize like, oh, I can do it in a respectable way that feels great for everyone. And it's going back to learning something as simple of like, oh, I'd love to flirt with you right now. Or like, oh, this was so much fun flirting with you. We should do this again. And so there's clear starts and end. And so it's not dragging on or, getting the feedback.
Think that, in society, we're missing clear communication. We're like afraid to clearly say what we want and need. Obviously, out of fear, we've all experienced when we've said our truth or what we want. Most likely when we were children, we didn't really have that freedom to say exactly how we felt. And so, kind of carrying that over to not really clearly communicating, like you said, even just to say, hey, I really want to flirt with you right now. Like, how would that feel for you? Like, you know, and that seems so foreign to people. They're like, well, we shouldn't have to ask that. Well, why not? I remember when my husband and I started counseling and we were talking about sex, and she goes, well, have you thought about telling him, like, hey, I would love to have sex with you tonight when you get home. Can we make that happen? And I was like,
Mm,
what? You don't do that, right? And she's like, well, why not? It would cut
yes.
through a lot of the stress, confusion, expectations. And I was like, you can do that. And like what you said, I love what you said is that practice because it does feel weird. It is foreign and it triggers that vulnerability of rejection. But if we have a space, like you're saying, to practice that, or even a safe partner that you have, say, hey, I'm really nervous in this area, but it's something I would like to grow in because I want to deepen our connection. Can you be patient with me while this feels awkward? Like it just saying that.
Yeah. But it's that level of vulnerability that helps create intimacy. And
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that you allude to, which I really like, is having the space to be able to say that is amazing. And teaching our partners that it's like setting a boundary is a gift and that we can set a boundary in a
Yes.
loving way. So it's like you can ask for what you want, and your partner can be like, oh, I really love that you asked for that. I might not have the capacity tonight for that, but I really appreciate you telling me what you need. Like, then it makes it easier to do it next time versus like if your partner's like, why are you asking that? Or no, I don't want to have
Right.
sex with that.
That
Like you'll never
rejection.
exactly, you'll never do it again, or it'll be harder to do it the next time. Whereas like learning how to share what our needs, wants, or desires in a way that our partner can hear us makes it easier to do it more often, which makes things easier, which kind of gets
Like a
past
snowball.
this. Yeah, exactly. And it helps us get past, one of these assumptions that a lot of people make, which is like, if you love me, you would know what I want.
Oh, I hate that phrase
I do too.
because
It sets you up for failure every time.
100%. When my husband and I got together, he said, I just want to let you know I'm not a mind reader. If we need milk from the store and there's no milk in the fridge, don't assume that I know that we need milk. Just communicate that we need some fucking milk.
Exactly.
And I think that this topic is so taboo, which is one of the reasons I'm absolutely honored to have you here because this is not a taboo topic. We all deal with this, whether you're single in a relationship, married, newly married, long term, years. Everybody experiences this. And I believe that even if you have a great relationship and a great sex life, there is always room to be growing and deepening that connection.
Oh, absolutely. And that's part of the reason why I came to be really interested in intimacy was by being a twin and realizing like, oh, I can't replace you. We have to figure out how to work together.
Mm,
And that level of choosing back kind of opened my eyes up to just the level of depth of intimacy you can create when you realize like, oh, you're not going anywhere. We're going to work on this.
that's friggin' huge. And it took me 41 years to understand what safe connections mean. And that's like my journey, my mission in this lifetime as a human is to be an example of what safe feels like emotionally. I mean,
Yeah,
not very many people in this world understand or can even comprehend what a safe emotional connection feels like. And for me, that just looks like I'm seen, I'm valued, and I'm heard, and I'm loved as I am. And so when we get into a space of being connected to ourselves and we can love ourselves and we are with somebody who, like you said, isn't going to go anywhere. For me, it also includes on being willing to work towards something also. I've been with a partner who wouldn't leave, but also wasn't willing to grow or,
mm,
learn with me. I don't even mean grow, but just learn. To me, that is growing, but whatever. It's so important to be with a partner who's willing to learn with you because we are always changing. We're always, what we like is changing. Our bodies are changing. And
yeah,
so we have to learn with that.
absolutely.
So you were talking about that vulnerability and rejection in flirting. How does, our fight or flight and freeze and fawn come into play in intimacy and during our sex life?
Yeah, it's a great question. It depends. It's different for every person. Like the first thing I just want to normalize is that we don't get to choose our trauma response. It's like
Damn it.
our body, does what it's going to do because it's trying to protect us.
Right.
And sometimes there's a gradual. It's like I think a lot about like when we're fully embodied, our body has a tremendous amount of wisdom. It's like there's signs along the way in terms of like our body is knowing where our boundaries are because our boundaries change, what we want changes.
Does this feel safe or not?
Exactly. Yeah, it's like, did you have enough sleep? It's like there's so
Mm.
many factors. And so one of the things I think a lot about, which is like learning how our body lets us know when someone's getting close to a boundary.
Well, that's where that somatics comes in, correct? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Learning
Being
that.
in tune with our body.
Because if not, we're left with looking at like, oh, resentment, which builds into anger, which then can build into fight or flee. And so it's like that one can have, progressions, but sometimes it also just can come on really quick, like especially like freeze, which is probably the one I talk a lot about because it's one of the harder ones to notice.
Mm. Oh, yeah, we talked about this.
Yeah, and I think that's something of like wanting to normalize like a little bit of dirty talk or a little bit of foreshadowing of like, oh, I would love to go down on you right now. It's like if your partner doesn't respond, it's like, oh, maybe it's a good time to check in
Mm-hmm. Right.
and not assume that they're ready for whatever next escalation point is. Because it's like it's easy to forget when someone starts to freeze that, words go first or get stuck in the throat or they stop moving. And in the moment, it could be easy to accidentally not notice some of those signs, but it's like normalizing, just asking and slowing everything down. Like I think in our culture, we see so many movies about passion, about like clothes come off and it's fast and exciting, and that's definitely fun, but it's also building anticipation. It doesn't hurt intimacy, it doesn't hurt arousal. It actually makes it even more intense. So it's
Heightens
like,
it. Yeah.
yeah. And so in some ways, especially with new partners or if you're unsure, like it's such an easy and fun way to really kind of slow things down and get feedback and build that intensity at the same time.
Yeah. And it offers that space to discover both with questions and their body language, that's those somatics. What are you feeling?
Yeah.
Talking to your partner, what are you feeling right now? Like getting really curious. And I think that it's so important because before my husband, sex was like, I grew up very religious. So it was like bad,
Yeah.
terrible thing to do. Right. So the one thing that I really love is the safety he offered
Mm.
to explore, to like ask questions like, do you like this? Does this feel good? And that was foreign to me that you could ask questions during sex, like you could talk. Like that's a thing, right? And I think so much of society, movies, all of that, the fairy tales, and even that statement, if he wanted to, he would, or it's this unspoken that people are just supposed to know. Like if it's supposed to be, it's just going to feel right, where it's just going to flow. Those expectations, and so much is ruined in those moments if we just, like you said, stopped and got curious and communicated.
Oh, absolutely. And in the moment, it's easy to ask questions, especially if we stick to yes, no questions, because that way our partner can respond, but we're not getting them in their head. So they're staying embodied, they're staying
Right.
connected. Like, so it's
I
like,
think that's huge.
yeah, like asking like, oh, what do you want? Is, in the moment is not a great question because that's like, oh, out of my body into my head. I don't know. But it's like, do you like this or this? A or B? Yes or no? Like that way, it's far easier to stay in the moment and give crucial
Love
feedback.
that. Notes. Thank you. I appreciate that. Because I was thinking back to my own experience and I've been asked that and I'm like, I don't,
It's jarring
what?
sometimes. Yeah.
It is. You're right. And that yes or no. And, vice versa for my partner, for my husband, I'm sure he's like, why are you talking? Like, why are you making me get out of what I'm feeling right now? So that's huge. So can you repeat that just for the listeners? Because I think that that's a huge nugget.
Yeah. So it's like really focusing either partner asking yes, no questions or A or B. It's like, do you like this or that? Because that way you can give feedback that's helpful, but you're not getting out of your body. And so it's like open-ended questions while having sex is not great, but really getting very specific. And it goes back to building the capacity to be specific. Because sometimes
Yeah.
it can be a lot to ask, but it's like it's going back to like, are you ready for me to press your breasts? And then having a partner learning like, oh, I love that you're asking. I'm not ready, but I'll let you know when I am ready for that next escalation.
Just real quick, after you're done listening to this amazing episode on this pretty freaking sweet podcast, give it a 5-star rating, and then head on over to the Podcast Connection Network and check out all the other amazing podcasts that we got over there. This is a plug. I got one too. It's called The Nonchalant Perfectionist. Check us all out. The link, you know where the link's going to be in the episode's description.
And that's such a safety in
Yes.
relationships that I don't really know very many people. I mean, I am in the field of helping couples create that. I don't know very many couples, which it breaks my heart that even have that safety. And I think, let me know what you think, is it really also comes from loving yourself first too. Because I know that when I did not love myself and I was not confident, I was very much in my head, very much comparing to everything, very fearful. What is he thinking? All of these things. Am I to this? Am I not this? So I think that part of that really stems from being connected to yourself first and that confidence so that when your partner says, this doesn't really feel that great, you don't crumble because I have been there too. Like that doesn't feel good. And I'm like, I fucked up.
Mm.
I'm so sorry. I'm scared. I'm not enough. I don't know what to do now. Like, I just want to cry. I just want to go away, and my husband's like, no, 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 it's okay. It's okay. But it takes time and safety to learn that.
Oh, absolutely. And it was such a great example of learning how to have the capacity of those conversations and then even when you don't, it's like teaching our partners what is it that we need when we're in those spots, because it's hard to ask for what you need, which is what usually like wanting to be connected. But yet in those moments, it's so easy to kind of go into autopilot or run away. And it's like that's the opposite of what we might want, but we might not have the capacity to communicate in the moment. Because as soon as we get triggered or adding meaning to what someone's saying,
Adding meaning to what someone is saying, that hits home. Say
yeah,
that for the people in the back.
yeah,
And asking, what did you mean by that?
absolutely. It's like,
It's
and there's so,
but we don't think of that simplicity.
yeah, like there was a long time. It's like I was so afraid of like asking women out because I was afraid of rejection. It's like I don't know them enough to be afraid of rejection. I'm adding the meaning of their NO of no, and I'm using that club that they're handing me to beat myself up. They're not doing it. It was like that was such
Right.
a big aha moment of like, no, I'm the one that's doing this.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge. So rejection is us telling ourselves we're not enough.
Yeah.
We're taking that meaning of what they're saying. That's our interpretation of their no, correct?
Yes, it's like adding that all this extra story that they're probably not intending it. They're providing clear feedback.
Right.
And then I was adding more to it because it's like everyone has defense mechanisms. And it's like we have stories we tell ourselves. And so when we get feedback that's close to a story, it's very easy to just go into autopilot of like, oh, look, she doesn't want me, or I'll be all alone, or whatever story we tell ourselves. And that's the interesting thing about especially intimate relationships, is that it's like that person sees and has access to parts of ourselves that we don't let most people have access to. And so it can be very challenging and very tender when we're rejected by our partner because they have access that the most people will never have.
Right. That deeper level of vulnerability.
Exactly, which means that it's so important to build the skills of setting a boundary lovingly and really kind of learning how to have repair conversations, because it's inevitable you're going to poke each other or touch each other's buttons, and
Yeah,
there's going to be miscommunications because that's part of learning.
it is. And it's part of every relationship that we have. And that kind of brings me into, trauma. When you experience trauma, especially sexual trauma, that can be so tough to navigate in intimate relationships. I know that I have, just experienced something very traumatic, and it is a challenge for me. And that's kind of what, you were giving me some reassurance like, yeah, you're on the right road. It just takes that time and that safety to rebuild that trust and safety. So, in that, what is something that you would tell somebody who has been through something traumatic and would love to deepen their connection?
The big thing is really like rebuilding safety within ourselves. Like in Somatica, they talk about this idea of like a resiliency basket of like, how is it that we can take care of ourselves and nurture ourselves when needed? Because it's like as the growth happens, it's like having these moments of knowing like what it is that I can do for self-care that really helps bring myself back neutral, really kind of take care of myself. Because it can be a lot and it takes time.
Yeah. And I know that there's so many listeners who have experienced sexual trauma. And just as a reassurance, I think that a lot of people feel like I'm broken and I'll never be fixed in this area and I'll never be able to have intimate, deep, passionate sex again because I've experienced sexual trauma. What would you say to that?
I would say the big key is like being patient with ourselves and really honoring your process of healing and what that journey is, because you'll get there, but it's going to take some time to really honor what you need. And part of growth is really honoring our boundaries.
Mm,
It's like it's very easy to wish like, oh, I wish my boundary was bigger, or I wish I could get back out there and have sex again or whatever, wherever you're at in your journey, it's like honoring where you're at and rebuilding that muscle of like, oh, this is what I need right now. And then learning how to communicate that to your partner, like, oh, I'm not ready to do that. I'd love to, but I'm not ready. And just learning to build that self-awareness, but also the ability to communicate. And I know that it takes time. I know I felt like that at one point.
Yeah, I love that. And can you just take that like a step further? And how would someone honor what they're feeling? Like, I know what that means for me, but I just want to hear from you what that really means to honor what you're feeling in the process.
Yeah, for me, it's like getting clarity on where you're at in the process and like honoring commitments to ourselves. Is it like, oh, I'm not going to date for a year and like, take care of myself? It's like that might feel right for someone. It's going to be different for every person. It's like in my mind, there's different stages. You have the experience, then you have whatever it is to get back to neutral. And there's so many fantastic modalities and trauma specialists and so many different ways to go about that. But then once that journey's done, in my mind, you still have to learn how to rebuild intimacy,
Mm-hmm.
like rebuild the muscle of saying no and holding a boundary, especially like if we're pleasers, like there's so many other layers that make it confusing. And so it's like a lot of, in my mind, I think of it as like this continued journey of self-awareness of like, what are my defense mechanisms that no longer serve me? Is it people pleasing? Is it auto-accommodating people? And then bringing myself awareness to that so that I know what am I going, because it's like once we have the awareness of something that I do, then I have a chance to change it. But if I'm not aware that I auto accommodate people or go into a pleasing mode because I don't want to feel rejected, it's hard to choose something different. And so it's like, in my mind, the biggest first step, which is also the hardest, which is like bringing that awareness to,
I just wrote self-awareness.
yeah, it's like the coping mechanisms, because sometimes they just happen automatic because we've been doing the same thing for so long, and it's hard to have the realization of like, oh, that behavior doesn't serve me anymore. It did when I was a child, or it did whenever it is that I adopted that coping mechanism. But at some point we outgrow those, and it's time to realize and honor what we got out of them, but also realizing like for me to go where I want to go, I need to do something different.
Right, exactly. And I feel like the step that you said first, a lot of people skip over, right? That honoring part and really feeling and going through the grief of the trauma and how that affected you and how that affected my body. When I get triggered, where do I feel that? I mean, I am a huge advocate of somatics because for me, one of the biggest ways to get in tune with yourself is where you feel it in your body. So when that trigger happens after a traumatic experience, something is said, your body goes right back into the trauma of when it happened, and honoring that and saying, I'm not okay right now. My body is not okay. My body is literally saying, we're not safe. It's trying to keep us safe. And for me, one of the biggest things was permission in that grief to fluctuate, to be angry, to be sad, to want to make love, to not want him near me at all, to being okay, to not being okay. And I think that that's so important, especially in dealing with something traumatic with a partner or even yourself. But if you're trying to get back to intimacy, is really you honoring what's happening to you and communicating that and having your partner honor that and create that safety and allow you to not be okay in this grieving and healing process. And it's going to affect both parties. And so for me, this is really where that validation for one another, that space that we were kind of talking about before, and saying, okay, I'm going to acknowledge what's happening to you. I'm going to kind of reserve what's happening to me so I can offer space for what's happening to you. And then in a very safe, reciprocal connection, then you can turn around and the other person can say, okay, well, how did you feel in this situation? What are you feeling? and then be there to validate them. For me, that's that layer of, you were saying, rebuilding that trust and that communication. And I feel like so many people skip over the painful healing step of grief, and it's shitty sitting in the uncomfortable and the pain.
Oh, absolutely. Because it is uncomfortable. It's such a useful step. And there's so many other different modalities of like, gestalt work or giving those feelings a voice or journaling. Like there's so many different
Right.
ways to move them. But you're absolutely right. It's a necessary step.
I love what you said, is that I'm a huge advocate of, there's not one modality that's really going to get you where you want to go. It's a collective. This is why we're all working together on this journey. It's a collective of all of this, because like you said, part of getting connected to yourself is learning what the fuck feels right for you.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is such a foreign concept for so many people, because we're in these teeny little boxes and we have to follow all these certain rules of what we're supposed to do. And we forget to learn what feels right for us. And that's such a huge step. And then being able to communicate that, that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing you mentioned, I was thinking about is like even nurturing like the inner knowing or the inner guidance. It's like can be so helpful because it's like only you know what's right for you. People can guide you, but it's like, and that's the thing I love about somatic experiences is it's like when you have the reference point of like, oh, this feels good for me, or it's like no one can talk me out of my experience of flirting. Like it's locked in the cells. It's no longer a mental thing. It's like I have that feeling. And so there's such power and wisdom in that. And I think it's also really powerful for like, if you think about like a lot of women are essentially like the gatekeepers of sex in terms. So it's like, it's hard for a lot of women to really kind of relax and receive. And I think that's why it's so important to talk about consent and talk about escalations and really empowering women instead of just taking the kind of sex or the kind of advances they're getting and being like, oh, I really love that you want to touch my breasts. I'm not ready for that right now. I would really love it if we could connect more, or, I would really love it if we could eye gaze, or I'd love it if we could just keep rubbing my shoulders and I'll let you know when I'm warmed up or ready for whatever next thing is.
Yeah, definitely.
It's like in a really empowering moment.
That goes into a whole different like topic of like divine masculine and divine feminine, right? We were just having a conversation yesterday, is that most women are in their masculine. I know that that's something that I struggle with. And I really need, I mean, we need both.
Yeah.
We need our masculine and feminine, but I reside more in my masculine. And so it's so important for my husband to be in his masculine so that I can turn off and be in my feminine. And I mean, I know that's a whole other topic, but I feel like it slightly was what you're talking about, is that
Definitely
tapping into that divine feminine. And that doesn't mean fawn.
Exactly. Absolutely. Exactly. It's not that at all. But it goes back to what we were talking about. Like that, for that to happen, you have to have a sense of safety. And it's like,
Yes.
in my mind, that's the foundation. Like everything builds from there. And so it's like
100%.
that's the starting point. And it takes work because you have to be vulnerable enough to share, like, oh, I'm not there yet, and have the self-awareness of like, great, these are my triggers, or these are the areas I'm not ready to explore yet, and communicate those and know that your partner has their own expectations and their own areas, and their triggers are going to be different and their trauma response will be different, and learning to communicate those things just in itself can be quite an intimate and really bonding experience, because we're sharing intimate parts
100%.
Yeah, we're sharing intimate parts of ourselves, because those kinds of conversations we don't have with just anyone.
And I think that that's such a huge thing, is that I'm finding that even for men, which is not something that I knew, that sex is very emotional.
Yeah.
And it's not something that's really talked about. I think for a lot of men, it's portrayed that it's non-emotional.
Yeah.
And we can get into talking about like porn and stuff like that. It's still emotional. There's just, porn is so prevalent, in my opinion, is because there's no fear of rejection.
Yep.
No fear of rejection. Of course,
Exactly.
it would be an easy go-to, because that emotional need to feel safe and not rejected
Exactly, because right, I didn't have to. I didn't have to go out. I didn't have to meet someone. I didn't have to set my intent. I didn't have to ask them if they wanted to have sex. I didn't have to have a conversation about testing.
Right. I didn't have to be vulnerable.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's so many layers. Absolutely, I think it's such a great point that's easy to forget about.
Mm-hmm.
Porn sets unreal expectations in so many layers in terms of what intimacy is.
So we'll have you back on next month to talk about this topic.
That'd be fun.
It's a huge, I'm really passionate about it because I've experienced it. My husband and I talk a lot about it and just my past experiences and things like that. And it's so normalized and prevalent, which, to each their own. If it works for you and your partner like it, kudos, that's cool. But in an overall essence, in my viewpoint, is it robs a lot of opportunity to be vulnerable, right? It's easy. And then, like you said, it creates these expectations that are not realistic.
Exactly. And it gets people away from learning the skills to actually ask of what we want and then learn what we want, because it's one thing to admit to ourselves what turns us on or what we desire. It's a whole nother thing to actually ask someone else, because you're right, the layer of rejection, or like, if they knew this about me, would they still love me? Like that
Right.
assumption can be really scary. But it's like it's those little moments of vulnerability and being seen that happen thousands of times in relationships, which is what builds the intimacy.
And those are the sexy moments. Like, I don't know if it's the same for men, but I mean, I think I can attest for women that when a man is vulnerable and expresses what he wants and needs, and like, hey, this doesn't really feel good. Like, can we try something different? I mean, and we talk about it and we have a conversation, like that makes me want my husband more.
Mm.
Because he's letting me into those really vulnerable parts. I want to be deeply connected. I want to be deeply emotionally connected to him. So when we are talking about things that are scary and vulnerable, that's when we're getting closer. And so then the sex feels way more delicious because we're emotionally connected at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good point, because it's like for a lot of men that, especially the ones that have grown up of like, oh, don't show your feelings, hold them back. It's like
Right.
sex, they almost need sex to access those feelings as a starting point in a lot of ways, because it hasn't been developed, because it's been shut down in so many other areas of their life. And so it's easy to forget that, like the point you're making about being emotional during sex. It's like, it's so true, but yet it's hard for men to access those feelings. But yet when it does, it's amazing. And it's part of men's work, in my opinion, men's work to do, because it's an area that can be expanded on.
Yeah, I love that. And that also brings me to, I mean, I feel like I could talk about this all day. So in my community, we talk a lot about this, and the men were saying, and I found it so heartbreaking that, and it really made me think my personal life is that they're only touched during sex. And something men need so much more than women fully can comprehend is touch, and they're only touched during sex. So then they associate sex with love. A lot of men want sex all the time, which is not bad, but partly because they just want to be touched. They just want to be held.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and the reassurance that brings of like, oh, do you love me? Like, yes, like
Safety. Yeah.
in safety. And I think it's so important. Like, especially if we think about like love languages, it's like,
Yes.
because you're absolutely right. Touch doesn't happen nearly enough. And it's like, it's part of the reason why I kind of stumbled into tango dancing.
Mm.
And one of the things that I didn't realize by doing tango dancing, like just how much touch is so important in other aspects of life, not just in intimate relationships, but it's like that need, our primal need for connection that partner dance gives us, because there's not very many avenues of how do you get non-sexual touch in our culture.
That's so true. I think it's funny that you mentioned that because in emotionally focused therapy, which I practice, we call it the tango dance. So
Mm,
because connection is a dance. It is.
it really is.
So, Jason, thank you so much for your knowledge, just your ease in talking about something that can be really scary for so many people. I would absolutely love to have you back on. I think that this topic can be talked about so much more and so much in depth. But can you give the listeners where they can find you, what you offer? All of this will be in the description of the episode, but I just want to give you a moment to kind of tell them yourself.
Awesome. Yeah, the easiest way to connect with me is through my website, courtconnections.com. And the two main focuses that I really love working with people is really learning how to build intimacy by learning how to have repair conversations and really helping people overcome like shame around accepting themselves, learning how to communicate those to their partner, really kind of exploring, because it's like doing the work, especially if you've had a trauma experience, doing whatever trauma modality, it's like, that's not the end. That's, in my mind, just still the beginning, because we have to relearn boundaries, learning what we want, communication. And that's what I love working on, is really helping people accept themselves and their desires and learn how to share those with the people that matter to them.
I love that. Thank you. I have one last thing that I want to ask you.
Okay.
Back to the somatics. I want to leave the listeners with a way that they can really understand what that means. Like, what does it mean for them to be in touch and feel what's happening to them? So when we were talking about when my husband was opening up and being vulnerable, I feel this warmth in my stomach and then, a little fluttering in my chest or my heart beating fast, because I'm getting excited and nervous because that attraction and that arousal is starting to happen. And I think it's so important, like you said, getting into your body, those somatics. Can you explain it a little bit on how they might be able to do that with their own body?
Yeah, there's so many different ways to be embodied. The way that I can approach it is through erotic breathing. But the place to start is to really start with awareness of just checking in to our body, because our culture really celebrates, productivity and knowledge and kind of like, I think of like head up. But it's like when we're fully embodied, we're in touch, we can feel our feet, and our body gives us all these kinds of feedback. And so it's like, just notice and pay attention. Like, when are we holding our breath? Is there hotness? Is our armpit starting to sweat? Do you start to get fidgety? It's like, are the muscles starting to tense up? Do they feel like your chest is on fire? And everyone's different. The way our body lets us know are different. But the first place is to start with really just bringing awareness. And it can be something as simple as just closing our eyes and just kind of scanning our body and just kind of realizing like, how far are we aware, or how connected are we with body? It's like, do I notice my heartbeat? Do I notice my stomach? Am I connected to my erotic center and my erotic energy? Those are kind of some of the things I think about, of like, in any moment, I can be like, oh, where am I at this moment? And sometimes I'm in my head, and then other times, I'm like completely neutral and relaxed, and I can, feel very relaxed and kind of feel all those things at once. And so it's just goes back to being aware of how am I feeling right now, not as right or wrong, but just this feedback, like, where am I right now?
I love that. You said it's not right or wrong, just where am I at, and slowing everything down.
Absolutely.
The views and opinions expressed by myself and any guest on this podcast are solely ours and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of any organizations we are affiliated with. The content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as medical advice. As always, consult with a trusted healthcare professional regarding any medical conditions or concerns.